existing. So tonight we have a distinguished panel that is going to give us the facts so we can be prepared and engaged in our local communities. I'm Meredith Turner, and it is my honor to serve as a social action chair for the Greater Cleveland Alumni Chapter and co-chair of the Midwest Day of Service. Just a note, you'll be in listen-only mode for the duration of this program. The public chat feature is available. So at any time, please put your questions in the chat. They will be addressed either during the conversation or later in the program. Your feedback is important to us. So near the conclusion of the program, you'll receive a survey when you exit the Zoom or possibly by email. So let us know so that we may continue to bring relevant programming to you. So you'll either get that in the chat or by email in a little while. So now it is my distinct honor to turn the program over to President Melanie Frazier for greetings and opening remarks. Madam President.
Thank you, Meredith. I am Melanie Frazier, the president of the Greater Cleveland Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, where our chapter is approaching 100 years of service in the Greater Cleveland in the Greater Cleveland area. Thank you for attending tonight's discussion on censorship, banned books, and Black erasure, which is our lead-in into the Midwest Day of Service, or what we call Mids Day. This year's focus is on promoting literacy in Black and Red. We invite you, your family, and friends to attend our Mids Day activity on September 30th at 5 Cleveland area recreation centers, where you will be able to receive free books, register to vote, register for library cards, and have some food and some fun. The recreation center locations and times are forthcoming. Tonight's program aligns with our national priorities, and we hope that you will use this information discussed in tonight's event to empower you and to help you be an active participant and take a social justice stand in and for our community. Thank you.
Hey, Meredith, I think you're muted.
Aaliyah?
Yes. Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, everyone. I am Aaliyah Lawson, and I am the co-chair, one of the co-chairs of the Social Action Committee. Again, welcome to this provocative conversation about censorship, banned books, and Black erasure. I have the honor of introducing our first moderator tonight, a member of the Social Action Committee, our state school board member for District 11, Merle Johnson. Merle Johnson is a retired teacher with 40 years of teaching experience in Cleveland Public Schools. A graduate of Glenville High School in the Cleveland District, she received her Bachelor of Arts degree from Kent State University and her Master of Education degree from Cleveland State University. She was elected to the State Board of Education in November of 2016 and re-elected in November of 2020. During her years of teaching, Ms. Johnson helped new and struggling teachers improve their skills and was a member of the North Shore AFL-CIO Executive Board for many years up until the time she was elected to the State Board. Since her retirement, Ms. Johnson has taught student participants in the Upward Bound program every summer on the campus of Case Western Reserve University. Case's campus is also where she hosts a weekly radio show called It's About Justice. Let us welcome Merle Johnson.
Thank you for that name correction. Good evening, everyone. I am so happy that my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, is having this very important program. And I was thrilled that Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries was available to be with us this evening because, as far as I'm concerned, he's the person that we need to hear from on this topic. Dr. Jeffries is a history professor and author at the Ohio State University. He is the brother of Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader of the United States Congress. He was born in the Bureau of Brooklyn in New York and graduated summa cum laude from Morehouse College, oh, Morehouse man, with a BA in history in 1994. He became a member of the Pi chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. He received a PhD in American history with a specialization in African American history from Duke University in 2002 and taught for a year at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa before joining Ohio State's faculty in 2003. And I need this, I know I'm going on, but I need to mention this next part. His profile page also states that he was the lead historian and primary scriptwriter for the $27 million renovation of the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee, from 2010 to 2014, and worked on the PBS documentary, Black America Since MLK. He hosts a podcast called Teaching Hard History for the Southern Poverty Law Center's Educational Division, Teaching Tolerance. So I want to welcome you, Dr. Jeffrey. Thank you so much for being with us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me and for hosting this important event on this important topic.
Yes, I want to start off. You're an author, and I want to hear about your book or books you have written. Maybe someone can put that in the chat because I just think that if you're an author and you're writing books, they have to be well worth the read.
Well, 2 books so far. The first book is called Bloody Lowndes, Civil Rights and Black Power in Alabama's Black Belt. And that tells the remarkable story of the local people in Lowndes County, Alabama, which is located between Selma and Montgomery, who in 1965, in partnership with the young activists from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, not only succeeded in registering a majority of African Americans in this majority Black county, it was 80% Black in that Black Belt county, and at the start of 1965 had 0 registered Black voters, nobody. I mean, this long history of racial terror is kept Black folk from the polls. That's why they called it Bloody Lowndes County. But by the end of the next year, by the end of 1966, not only had this coalition of ordinary people and local activists succeeded in registering majority of African Americans, but they also created their own independent political party, which was the first Black Panther Party, the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. So the actual symbol, the idea of the Black Panther is born in rural Alabama in 1965 and then bursts onto the scene, that iconic image, and is then adopted by young people and Black Power activists in Oakland, California, and elsewhere in urban America. So that book tells that story of sort of how it came to be and the implications and ramifications. But for those who are interested in a little bit of a broader story, I also edited a book called Understanding and Teaching the Civil Rights Movement, which is an edited collection that digs into some of the topics, a lot of the topics and themes that I imagine we'll be talking about today. How do we teach and talk about hard history? How do we teach and talk about these difficult subjects like the civil rights movement, which isn't just about Rosa Parks sitting down and Martin Luther King standing up. It's about people organizing for power against white supremacy in the face of racial violence and racial terrorism, in which white folk were determined to maintain the status quo. And so that book really sort of unpacks a lot of these normative narratives and provides a way to think, to teach, to talk about the history as it actually happened as it relates to the civil rights movement.
And I appreciate that, because those books are so important, especially in today's society of censoring and saying what we shouldn't teach. And people really are looking for a blueprint on how do I do this? How do I teach the facts about the civil rights movement? So thank you for those 2 books. And I know you have more coming, and we'll look forward to it.
Absolutely.
I want to start off with, we're going to get deeper into Black history and so forth, but I want to start off with a term that we keep hearing, and I know that you will be able to give us a very good definition. We keep hearing the word extremist, and it is used all the time. And I was on Facebook and somebody said, well, what do you mean by that? So can you just give us a definition, what that means when we hear the word extremist?
when I hear extremists, I immediately think about somebody who called themselves an extremist. And that was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In 1963, writing from the Birmingham jail, when he writes his famous letter from Birmingham jail, he talks about being labeled an extremist. And he actually says, you know what? If you want to put that label on me, then I accept it. He said, I'm an extremist for nonviolence. I'm an extremist for justice. And so he said, sometimes we need to embrace that which those who are trying to maintain the status quo, and when the status quo itself is kind of extreme and they want to disparage us by labeling us extremists, he says, no, there's nothing wrong with being an extremist for fighting for the right things, an extremist for fighting for justice. One of the things that one of the traps, one of the pitfalls that we can't fall into in this current moment is when folk want to say that there are extremists on the right and there are extremists on the left, and that those two extremes are equally bad. No. When you got people fighting for freedom and you got people fighting to deny other people their freedom and equal rights, that ain't the same thing. And so put me in the category with Dr. King as an extremist fighting for justice, and not an extremist in this instance. Today, we're talking about extremists fighting to maintain white supremacy, to promote white supremacy, to deny people access to the ballot, and so many other things, to deny women basic reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. That's the extremism that we're fighting against. I mean, so the reality is, fighting for justice, we have to go all in, but we shouldn't be afraid when people say that that's an extreme position. No, freedom is never an extreme position, and fighting for it we should never be afraid to ally with those who are doing that.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I really appreciate it. So it depends on just how it's being used and what you're extreme about. So let's go into what's going on. So when it comes to African American history, educational censorship is not new at all. Can you explain the deep roots of this troubling phenomenon?
Well, certainly. I mean, when we think about educational censorship, and particularly censorship around American history as it actually happened, and the African American experience, we really should go back to the early 20th century. First thing is, it's important to keep in mind that when we think about public schools and public education in particular, that just simply didn't exist in the South at all before the end of slavery. It was after slavery, after emancipation, when Black elected officials, Black public officials, state legislators across the South committed to education, because African Americans understood the value of education. When Black legislators say, no, we are going to, with this new power and authority that we have, create a public education system. And so they do that. The first public schools, the first public schools in the South are created by African Americans who were determined to provide an education, not just for Black folk, but for all folk. So the South,
was during Reconstruction, correct?
That's during Reconstruction, absolutely.
And give us an idea of the years of Reconstruction. No,
absolutely. So emancipation happens in 1865. There's a couple years in there immediately after the Civil War when white former Confederates still have power. And so it's really not until 1867 and Congress passed a series of laws stripping these former Confederates of the power and authority that they still have, because these dudes were traitors, right? They're like, wait a minute, how y'all still in power? We won the war and y'all still hold power. Like, this doesn't make any sense. So Republicans finally said, okay, enough is enough, right? And they set them to the side, and that enables African Americans to participate in the political process for the first time. So in 1867, there's a series of, which would eventually become the 15th Amendment, which is ratified in 1870. But in 1867, Congress passes a series of laws that enable African American men, not women. Women in the United States still could not vote. Enable African American men to vote for the first time. Now, let's be clear about these Black men who are voting. One, they ain't voting for Confederates, right? They're voting for themselves, for a coalition of white and Black Republicans. And they're also voting as sort of family units. These are men who have the ballot, but be sure that if they didn't vote the right way, they could not come home, right? So women did not have the literal ballot at the time. They wouldn't get it until the 19th Amendment, but they were absolutely a part of the decision making and the balloting and the election and the ballot cast this entire time. So when Black men get the ballot, Black women are part of that political process and political decision making, right, from the very beginning. But they are then elected to office, and one of the first things they do is say, listen, we have to provide education for these newly and freed folk, for us, right, who have been denied education. And so we see these schools and school systems, public school systems, being erected and spreading throughout the South. 4 million enslaved African Americans now free Black folk, clamoring for the basics of education. But what happens then is that white Southerners in particular, right, are hostile to this, right? Like one of the great myths that we are up against, that we still wrestle with today, and that is that people are trying to perpetuate with these bans on books and the truths about the past, is the myth of perpetual racial progress. This idea that in America things may have been bad once, but they always get better, right? Like America really, in the end, always stands on the right side of history. Well, here's an example where we see that just ain't true, right? At the moment of emancipation, Black folk, are clamoring for the basics of education. They create these public education systems, and white folk in the South, who still deeply believe in white supremacy, are like, we can't have this, because although the institution of slavery was over, the desire to control Black labor was not, right? I mean, slavery was an economic system first and foremost, right? And it was about controlling Black labor and exploiting the fruits of their labor. And so although slavery is formally abolished, that deep desire to control Black labor in this agrarian society does not go away. And so once Black soldiers, Union soldiers, are withdrawn from the South, we see white Southerners, former Confederates, reasserting their power and authority in the South. This is in the 1870s, to regain control, to regain those mechanisms of labor control that had been lost when slavery was finally abolished. And as a part of that, we see two things that become really critical. And this speaks to this sort of early history, because all of this stuff is connected. In 1890, Mississippi will rewrite its state constitution, and every state in the former Confederacy will follow suit. And the purpose of rewriting these state constitutions was to disenfranchise African Americans. That was the sole purpose. Between 1890 and 1910, every state in the former Confederacy rewrite their constitutions for the sole purpose of taking the vote away from African Americans. But because the 15th Amendment was now law, was a part of the Constitution, which said you can't discriminate on the basis of race, all of those constitutions include colorblind mechanisms. This is when you get the poll tax. This is when you get these literacy tests. This is when you get the grandfather clause.
Counting the jelly beans in the jar and that kind of thing.
Exactly, because all of it's race neutral. All of it's race neutral on its face. But the purpose and intent was strictly, solely, specifically, explicitly to take the vote away from African Americans. Now, if I was teaching in class, now I know all you sisters understand this, but when if I'm teaching in class at The Ohio State University, right, and I get one of these, very nice white farmer, right, son of a farmer, sitting up in the back of the U.S. history class, and he's like, Dr. Jeffries, well, how do you know if the legislation, if the constitutional amendments don't mention race, how do you know that this was targeting African Americans? And this is the history that they don't want us to deal with, right? They said it themselves. You don't have to look at the legislation. You go to and look at the constitutional conventions, right? Because in those constitutional conventions, all of which is recorded, the thing that we have on our side, those who want to teach truth and teach history the way it happened, is we don't have to make anything up. I don't have to imagine or pretend or speculate that it was racism and white supremacy that was driving this legislation. They said it. They said, we don't want these Negroes to vote. Period. And if it costs a few white people, poor white people, because they can't afford a poll tax, well, everybody got to make sacrifices, right? Like, this is what they're saying. So we go to the primary source evidence, right? In the end, how do you combat all these lies and myths that the founders, for example, were abolitionists and they really wanted to end slavery? No, they didn't. They never said that. They couldn't divorce themselves from it. You just go to the evidence. They all said it. And so on the one hand, these two important moments. So you disenfranchise Black people. So in 1890, 1900, 1910, just take the vote away from them in the South. Because if you can take the vote away from them, then they can't pass laws and legislation that would create environments or safeguards against their exploitation as laborers. So we see convict leasing and sharecropping and tenant farming and debt peonage. All of these have the protection of law. So again, this is all about controlling labor. But now you have to rationalize it. Now you have to justify what it is that you're doing, right? And because even with the institution of slavery, it wasn't just enough to say, well, we're just exploiting their labor. There had to be this rationalization. And white supremacy was always this rationalization. Now, early on, when we're thinking about sort of the Catholic Church and then eventually sort of Southern Baptist, Christianity serves as that justification, right? The so-called curse of Ham, right? That becomes the justification, but it's still rooted in this belief in white supremacy. Well, fast forward to the turn of the 20th century, you're moving away from sort of Christian religious rationalizations for the exploitation of people. Now it becomes this sort of cultural, educational rationalization, right? Of what do how we're going to use the past to explain our poor treatment of Black people in the present. And this is where we see the rise of the lost cause mythology, right? That slavery, and there's a couple components to this, and this becomes spread throughout the South, right? And this is why we get all these damn Confederate monuments. I didn't mean to curse. This is why I didn't mean to curse, but it's okay. We family here. This is where we get all this lost cause mythology and all these monuments littering the landscape. Because it's at this moment where they're like, listen, we have to go back and explain, right? And begin to indoctrinate not only white Southerners, but the nation in this false history, so we can justify our exploitation of Black people and the use of violence and force and lynching to control their labor. So they begin to write these books, and this is when we begin to see in particularly in schools, book bans and censorship boards, right? And the winnowing out of texts that are supported by academics from Columbia University and the like, who begin to say slavery wasn't as bad as you think it was. In fact, Black people benefited from it, right? Here we that benefit again that we're hearing down in Florida, that the Civil War was not about maintaining the institution of slavery. It was about states' rights, which ain't true, right? If anything, it was the right of these states to maintain the institution of slavery.
Yes.
That Reconstruction was somehow a political experiment gone awry. It was fundamentally anti-democratic, and it was fundamentally corrupt. And that the Klan, that the use of violence through racial terror organizations to take back the South, to destroy Reconstruction, that they were somehow the true advocates of democracy as opposed to what they were, which was just racial terrorists. And so that becomes the narrative of the lost cause. And we're going to celebrate that by putting these monuments up across the South and really across the nation. We have some Confederate monuments here in Ohio. There were, streets named after Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis in Brooklyn, New York, where I grew up. It's like, what is that about? Right? But it was about perpetuating this belief in white supremacy. So when you have that, we begin to see literally the United Daughters of the Confederacy making a concerted effort to create these censorship boards. States like Mississippi and Alabama would not let Georgia, would not let a history book into their classrooms unless it had the seal of approval of the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
Oh my goodness.
And they weren't going to let it in unless it touted that line of the lost cause. And once you, and this isn't just like, and this is not just unfortunate, right? It's not just unfortunate that Black people were disenfranchised. It's not just unfortunate that Black people were subjected, and white people too, were subjected to this false history, this false narrative, the greatest lie America has ever told about the lost cause. But all of it was backed up, was undergirded, was enforced by racial terrorism and racial violence. And this lost cause narrative, you needed the Klan and that kind of violence. Otherwise, the South would have been destroyed. This serves as the rationalization for the use of political violence. using lynching and terror and race riots to maintain white authority and white control throughout the South. And so these book bans, this censorship, this false history doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It serves a real political purpose. It did then and it does now. And those who suffer the most and who become the victims or targets of that political purpose have always been African Americans.
Now, you keep using the expression lost cause. Explain what you mean by that.
So that's sort of the term that these former Confederates and Confederate sympathizers will give to this narrative arc of that sort of slavery, Civil War, Reconstruction, that posits the Confederacy as having fought for democracy, and this noble effort and endeavor that unfortunately they lose, right? So here's the thing. This is with the Confederate monuments and this history as a whole, right? It's like you can take one of the things that people say about these Confederate monuments, like if you remove the statue of Robert E. Lee in Richmond, Virginia, that somehow you are erasing history, right? If you remove these symbols of white supremacy, somehow you're erasing history. You're not erasing history, right? Robert E. Lee, you can remove the monument. Robert E. Lee still lost, right? He's still a traitor, right? Confederacy still lost. Doesn't change the history, right? Mm-hmm. All you're doing is taking out a little cheap monument, that is signaling, right, that white supremacy somehow has a place in the public square. So this narrative, they give the label of the lost cause, right? The cause of sort of Southern identity and maintaining the Southern way of life, right? The one thing that they did get right is that they lost. They lose the war, but they win the narrative, right? And that's an important distinction, and partly because not because Black folk gave into it, right? I mean, this is Carter G. Woodson and W.B. Du Bois who are writing against this sort of narrative, but the white North, good white folk here in Ohio buy into it. They go along with it, and that's part of the problem as well.
And you use the term white supremacy. We hear it all the time. And I was having a conversation with a young activist, and white supremacy is not just about thinking you're better than Black people.
Yeah,
it's about thinking you're better than everybody. LGBTQ, women. I mean, so talk about the broad definition of white supremacy and how it's not just we're better than Black people.
Yeah, no, that's an important point. I mean, and two things come to mind immediately. One is all this revolves around race, right? But the thing is that race isn't real, right? Like race is a biological myth. There's nothing biologically when it comes to this thing called race that really separates any human being from another human being. So it's biologically meaningless, but race is socially meaningful, because we've used race to create this sort of hierarchy, right? And that hierarchy, not surprisingly, as no surprise to anyone on this call, puts people of European descent at the top and people of African descent at the bottom, right? And we've used this to create this hierarchy, this thing called race, to create this hierarchy for the last 500 plus years. We know exactly the moment when it comes into sort of, the public discourse, to use as a rationalization, justification for the institution of slavery and enslaving people of African descent. So we know. But if we know that it's not real in that sense, then why not just sort of ignore it? Well, we can't, because in the American context, we use race as a stand-in for cultural heritage and cultural ancestry. That's why we can't fall into the colorblind trap. Right? It's like, yeah, we know it's biologically meaningless, and we know the ways in which it has shaped sort of the social hierarchy, but we also use it to reflect who we are, right? And so when somebody says, "Oh, I don't see your race," well, you're not just erasing me, you're also erasing the experiences of my parents in Jim Crow Northeast, of my grandparents in the Jim Crow South, and so many others, whose experiences, shape who I am today. But white supremacy is, and this is so critically important, and it's a more specific way of talking about the problems of race and racism in American society. Because while race isn't real, racism is very real. manifesting itself both in personal ways. This is the personal prejudice, right? I think I'm better than you, you know, because my skin color is fair and yours is dark, whatever it is, however you want to, you know, people are lining up around race. So that, you know, that's the personal prejudice. We get that and understand that. But we also dealing with the structural, right? The ways in which racism and racial discrimination is replicated and perpetuated through institutions, systems, and structures.
Which leads to critical race theory.
And this leads to that dangerous thing called critical race theory.
That's systemic racism.
Yes,
It was
yes.
intentional. It was not an accident.
No, exactly. It's intentional, and it can be perpetuated without a bad actor, right? And we can certainly talk about critical race theory and it's like systemic racism and important, because that's an important part of why we are even in this moment currently. But the white supremacy aspect of it is really a more specific way of talking about the kind of racism that we're dealing with, because it's not arbitrary. It's very specific to elevate people of European descent and to denigrate people of African descent, right? And then that plays out not just at a personal level, but as you were pointing out, at a very systemic and structural level, right? I mean, and impacts everything and has impacted everything from educational attainment, educational access, healthcare access, wealth equality or versus inequality, health disparities, all of that can be tied back to
mass incarceration,
you name it. There is a racialized component to it that ties to this very specific thing that we have to understand as white supremacy.
Thank you. So when we talk about teaching history openly and honestly, why is that so important?
Well, it's important because we haven't been doing it, right? And we haven't been doing it because the narrative of the past, what we say about the past, impacts how we understand the present. See, so you have to understand the past in order to make sense of the present. And so if you offer a false narrative about the past, right? Racism existed, but it was really only personal prejudice. There's no such thing as institutional racism, right? It just somehow stops at the front door of the courthouse, which is all nonsense. We can literally look at laws such as those disenfranchisement laws, right? That targeted African Americans and continue to target African Americans, right? I mean, and think about this. It was only starting in 1890, that 1890 to 1910 period, when a person, if you had a felony conviction, that you were not allowed to vote, right? Like, we literally know when that comes into American jurisprudence. And this is the moment, because they were specifically targeting African Americans for specific crimes. This is convict leasing. They would attach a felony conviction to them, and then they could prevent them from voting. Okay, so we know the purpose of that law and why it came into being and how it has impacted and disenfranchised African Americans for generations. And even today in the state of Virginia, 2 out of 5 African Americans can't vote because they have a felony conviction. Right? Now, we say, you talk about systemic racism and the way in which it impacts law. This literally goes back to a time when the sole purpose of that law was to rob African Americans of the vote. Mississippi activists in Mississippi were trying to get that removed in the state of Mississippi, and the Supreme Court, with our good friend, he's not my good friend, but Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court, said, oh no, well, we know why it came into effect, but we should ignore that, right? And because it's irrelevant, because clearly that's not the intent of it now. It is still the intent of it, right? The reason why we haven't gotten away with it.
And he knows that.
And of course he knows that, but he got his own issues. I'll leave him alone for right now. But we have to deal. So we have to teach this history, especially. I mean, so that we can understand. But really, our charge is for the generations that are coming up under us, right? I mean, we have to understand for ourselves, but they especially have to understand. Everybody has to understand the past so they can make sense of the present. But the whole purpose of making sense of the present is so that you can shape the future, right? So, and especially for a younger generation, so that they have the tools that they need to address the problems that we have failed to solve in the present. And they can't do that if they don't understand the source, the origin, the evolution of these problems, and particularly as they revolve around racial inequality. And they won't be able to do that if we give them this false narrative about what the past was, this Disney version of the past, right? Like there may have been problems, but we all solved them. Black people eventually get ahead, we'll get ahead. There was slavery, yeah, but you had the Civil War, and then you had, Martin Luther King, and then you got Barack Obama, and now you got Beyonce, right? Like everything always gets better, right? Like this is the that doesn't help you solve anything. Right. And so we have to teach about this and talk about it in truthful and honest ways so that we can address the real world problems that we still face today.
So what about the little white children in the classroom that are feeling uncomfortable?
Oh, the little white children, they'll be all right. They'll survive. Listen, so part of the issue is they need to be made uncomfortable, right? But this has been my experience, and I'm sure
Explain why you said that.
Oh yeah. So this has actually been my experience, right? The comfort discomfort thing ain't a children problem. It's not the kids who get uncomfortable about this. No, it's the parents, right? The parents and the elders and the adults. We are in the kids' way. What happens when Kylie, right? Because it's always Kylie, right? When Kylie comes to my class, right? And we're teaching civil rights or African American history through film, right? And we start talking about this stuff, right? And like, look, let me explain to you what lynching was. And she's never heard of lynching, right? I mean, this is every semester, right? They will be shocked by this, right? They wind up going through the 5 stages of grief, right? So first is disbelief, right? Then it's like, how did this could not possibly have happened because it doesn't match what their the version of American history that they've been given. So then they so disbelief. Then they start bargaining. Well, maybe my teacher didn't know this history. Maybe my parents didn't know about segregation in the South. Like, no, they knew. They knew. And then they get angry, right? So Kylie's getting mad, right? Watch out, world. Kylie's mad. But look, you know what? Kylie never gets mad at me. Kylie has never gotten mad at me for showing her what had happened, the truth about the American past. Right? That Thomas Jefferson was not only, the author of the Declaration of Independence, but he was also a pedophile, right? I mean, he was raping a 15-year-old girl when he was 45 years old, right? Kylie never gets mad at me for that. She gets mad at those teachers, right, who never shared this information with her. She gets mad at her parents for never raising these issues, right? So that, again, so who's uncomfortable there? I'm not uncomfortable. Kylie's not uncomfortable anymore. Right? It's the parents who get uncomfortable, right? Because they're raising these issues. But then after anger, right? Then it's depression, then sadness, right? Because it's like, man, what does this mean? And this is where we get a lot of that misinterpretation of people saying, well, kids, Kylie's getting, she's uncomfortable. No, she's depressed because you've been lying to her, and now she got to deal with the truth.
Yep.
And what does this mean for her identity, her family, her understanding of the world? And then finally, we go through this, this is a full semester class, right? Finally, at the end of the semester, we get to the point of acceptance. And this is critically important, right? Like as a teacher, as an educator, we want the students, we want those who we're engaging with public, in the public space, a classroom more broadly defined. We want them to have come to the point of acceptance, right? Accept that this history happened, right? Because that's the understanding. If you accept it and you understand it, then you can make sense of that past and present. But here's the thing, and this is where we get wrapped up in all this, we're making white kids uncomfortable. And this is literally in the legislation that they've passed about divisive issues, right? In Oklahoma. It
was in Ohio's legislation.
In Ohio,
327. Yes, indeed. They had the word uncomfortable was in there.
Uncomfortable. It's like when I go into my classes, yeah, go ahead. All right. My 8-year-old daughter, she knows when I'm on like a Zoom, like she just asks stuff because I'm like, all right, fine, go ahead. You can have it. The degree of like this thing called uncomfortable. If you're learning African American history, if you're learning U.S. history, you will be uncomfortable. Like what part of slavery should make anybody comfortable, right? I mean, what part of mass incarceration in the present should make you should be uncomfortable? There's no way to teach American history the way it happened and not be made uncomfortable. The problem, but so two things. One, there's a difference between being made uncomfortable and being made unsafe, right?
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
different, right?
Yeah.
And we're not talking about making people unsafe in the classroom. We're talking about you need to lean into that discomfort. You need to be, you got to trouble the water, right? And figure out, well, why am I made uncomfortable by it? How come I didn't know this? And this, I think, is actually where gets us to the point where we are today, is that these kids, especially the white kids, they went, none of this legislation is really about, we worried about Black kids learning too much, right? That's not what this is about. This is about, we're worried and concerned that these Black kids who are learning too much and learning about organizing and all this stuff are influencing our white kids, right? And these little white children, like in the summer of 2020, Kylie was on the streets protesting the largest protest of American history, and then went home to the suburbs, right? She, to Solon and all these other places, right? And was telling her mom, listen, we got to do something about systemic racism. What? Like, wait, what? Like,
Where
what
did you get from?
Exactly. What is happening?
Yeah.
And then the response. And here's the thing that really shook political conservatives is their parents were listening, because the parents will listen to the kids. In that moment, they were like, yeah, something is wrong. Like, it seems like a world away now, right? But it was just 2 years ago that people were really seriously like, okay, there is a problem here. And we, Black folk, we understand that y'all been saying it forever. This isn't a revelation for Black folk, but for the rest of America, in the middle of the pandemic, when all of the attention was focused on Minneapolis and elsewhere, they were like, we got to do something about this. And there were legitimate calls. I mean, the State Board of Education passed a very powerful resolution in June of 2020 saying, we got to deal. We acknowledge the history of systemic racism, and we got to deal with it, right, going forward. And we will. Once you started seeing that and the calls for addressing these issues of systemic racism, that was triggering, right, to political conservatives in positions of political power. And they were like, oh, no. We can't have that. We cannot have that. Because there's only two things that you can do in response to a call to end systemic racism. Either you actually address institutions and systems and structures that perpetuate inequality, or you do nothing. And those who want to preserve the status quo, that means doing nothing. And so in order to do nothing, they had to rationalize it. They had to justify it. And they justified it by saying that we were indoctrinating. Their children were being indoctrinated with this thing called critical race theory, right? That became the justification for doing nothing in response to calls during the largest protest in American history to do something about ending systemic racism in America. And this was their response. The attack on critical race theory, the attack on education, and this really animated, right, those white parents who were afraid of change and who were just under the confusion in the air, right? Because even if you ask them, do you want to know, should history be taught honestly? They will say yes. The overwhelming majority of people will say yes. But what does that look like and what does it mean? All of that got lost. And in the political hysteria, a manufactured political crisis that resulted in the assault on education that we're wrestling with today. Oh, Sister Johnson, they still have you muted. They may need to unmute you.
Okay, is that better? All right, so I was saying that the response to the murder of George Floyd was a wake-up call for a lot of people. So there's a question I keep hearing: why Black history? Why is Black history being targeted for erasure? Why is it important that students specifically learn Black history, and not just Black students, but white students?
Of course. Well, there's no better prism through which to look at, understand, make sense of the broader American journey than the Black experience, than Black history. There is, from start to beginning, because African Americans, the African American experience, the centrality of race and races in American society is central to this whole project. So there is no better way to make sense. And not just talking about early African-American history or early American history, I mean, through the present, than to look at the various aspects of the African-American experience. And so, but when you look at that, when you look at America through the prism of the Black experience, suddenly America looks a lot different, a whole lot different, right?
Yeah.
Than the normative
Yes.
narrative that you had before. It's not simply a shining light on a hill, right? I mean, it has real flaws, you know, and shortcomings and injustices that we have to reconcile with, the legacies of which we're still dealing with and perpetuating today. And so if you don't want to deal with that history, like American history on its truest terms, then one of the simplest ways is literally to erase Black people from it. Just pull them out. And that's exactly what that's the sort of the that's the tip of the spear, right? For limiting the kind of history that people need to know about. And it's not a surprise that it starts with that and then moves to sort of, you know, discussions in history of LGBTQ folk that leads to discussions of women's history, right? I mean, all of this then leads, and so suddenly, what are you left with? Like a history of 3 white guys, you know, signing pieces of paper. And we know that ain't happened, right? But that's the version of the past that people are trying to promote. And but the key to making that history seem real is to pull out the Black experience, to ignore and marginalize the Black experience. And they know they can't do that. They know they can't offer this false narrative of the American past as long as African-American history is being taught honestly.
And that leads to the book banning. These groups that are running around, like in Tennessee, I think the Moms of Liberty wanted to ban Ruby Bridges Goes to School,
Unbelievable.
a little 32-page baby book. And one of the things I think that when you talk about honesty, they don't like the picture of the white people in there holding the horrible signs because they probably recognize some as their relatives.
Exactly it.
You know,
Exactly.
and the book has a happy ending. You know, it says,
right.
You know, Ruby Bridges was taught by this white teacher for a year by herself because the parents pulled their kids out. And then Ruby, she has a picture in there of her. She said, finally, I got to play with white children when they were allowed to come to the school. So, you know, there's good stuff going on. But if you ban that, people will never see that positive conclusion to that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, we ain't even talking about the radical stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like we ain't got to the Nat Turner stuff, right? I mean, they trying to ban.
We're just talking about little Ruby.
About Sister Ruby, right? I mean,
yes.
I mean, and it's stunning. You know, it is not the fault of Black folk, you know, that Mimar was a racist, and that now you got to explain this to your grandchild, right? Like this is where she was, and this represents who she was. Like that's a them issue. Right? Like they don't want to confront the reality of their own past. They want to pretend as though they were on the right side of history when they weren't. You know, they were not, period. And that's just, so part of it is personal, right? Like these, you know, these white women in Tennessee got issues with their daddies and mommies. I don't know. That's cool. They need to deal with it. But it's impacting us. That's why we can't dismiss it. Right, because now they have the ear of these legislators and they're passing this legislation, which impacts what all children learn. And what happens in Tennessee and what happens in Florida and what happens in Mississippi, we'd like to think it stays down there, bad enough that it's there, but we know clearly that it's not staying down there. All of these legislators, all these governors are in conversation. I don't need to tell you this, you know this, and it's all copycat legislation. They're just figuring out how to get it through the House and through the various chambers up here, just as they did down there.
When you talk about organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council and the Heritage Foundation and so forth, they do their model legislation, they send it to their dues-paying members in the states, and then they pass it. And sometimes they don't even take the name of the group off the legislation. They just kind of pass it as is without having read it. And that's pretty obvious when you ask them questions about it. So, you know, it's a movement to destroy public education and to destroy Black history. So what effect have these censorship efforts had on teachers and students?
Well, talking specifically about Ohio, I mean, in you know, well, elsewhere where this legislation has been passed, and right now Florida, certainly Texas, these are, are sort of the front lines of this battle. Ohio's not that far behind. Ohio's trying to do the very same thing, and has a super majority that can sort of push some of this stuff through.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, it's only because of the work that you've been doing and others who have been fighting back that it's not worse, that we don't have these bills similar to Florida already law. But that doesn't mean that even the threat of it, that doesn't mean that even debating these measures at the state level hasn't had a chilling effect on what goes on in the classroom.
Now, I have to interrupt you for a second. We do have
Yes.
Senate Bill 83 that outlaw diversity and equity and so forth in our college campuses. So we are trying to play catch up.
No, we are.
Yeah.
And thankfully, we sort of held it, it didn't go through in the last, but they haven't given up on it.
Right.
This isn't actually, I'm glad you brought up Senate Bill 83, because this also isn't just a K through 12 thing. Sometimes I forget I teach at college, and I'm like, teach at Ohio State, the Ohio State University. And I'm like, I was like, wait a minute, I'm also a state employee. Like,
we got to remind folks of 322 and 327, where they were threatening to take teachers' licenses and taking school funding if they taught about race and social justice in the classroom. And that was K to 12. So, they're covering everything.
They're covering everything, and it has a chilling effect, right? So State Bill 83 hasn't gone in, but you already have had these discussions about, well, I'm not going to teach this. Now, we even before all of this went down, the Southern Poverty Law Center in 2017, 2018 surveyed, did a sample of teachers nationwide, and found that 80% of these teachers, just on the issue of slavery, right? 80% of teachers wanted to teach about slavery, right? So this is before George Floyd, before all this. 80% of teachers. Now, we also know that 80% of teachers are white women, right? So the overwhelming majority of teachers, white teachers, wanted to teach about the issue of slavery, but only about 15% of them felt comfortable in their knowledge and their pedagogical ability to actually teach it effectively.
Did you say 50 or 15?
15, 15.
Okay.
So when asked, well, you want to teach it, you understand its importance, but do you feel comfortable and prepared to teach it? Only 15 felt comfortable. So now add on to that. Now that number didn't significantly change over the 3 to 4 years before we get to the current moment. But add now the added pressure that if you teach this, you could lose your job. Then forget about it, right? I mean, so the number of teachers willing to teach it, because they'll just sidestep it. So that's the chilling effect. And we were making progress with school districts across the country who were willing to teach this history, willing to talk about this, creating professional development opportunities for teachers. So we were making progress. And that is also part of the pushback, because people understood, right, that we were actually making gains in this area, and teachers were feeling more comfortable teaching this and willing and wanting to try to teach this history accurately. And then we get that some people call it it's a response to that what we saw, those protests in 2020, and the real gains that were being made in the nation with regard to teaching with regard to educational equity in the classroom.
Yeah, and now that K to 12 has been put in the hands of our governor, I'm really, really afraid that there's going to be a fast track to really, really erasing Black history and doing the kinds of things that are being done in the other states. So that's, to me, is what's really, really scary, that we could move in that direction. So we're winding down here. What can teachers, students, and parents do in response to the efforts to censor what is being taught in the classroom? We need some action steps here before we go to the Q&A.
Yeah, so I think the first, which is critical to any social movement, is we got to get informed, and we have to stay informed, which is why forums and discussions like this are so critically important. And it's not just getting informed about sort of history and the sort of the debates about historical stuff, but getting informed about what's happening on the ground, both in terms of state legislative action, like trying to seize control of the state school board and the legislative bills that are working their way through Congress, and the impact that will have working through state legislatures, and the impact that will have on schools. Getting informed about what's going on at the district level with our school boards, which is
Attending
critically
school board
important.
meetings.
Attending school board meetings,
Yes.
absolutely. Now, there's also, as a part of sort of getting informed and staying informed and sort of taking action steps, a lot of this at the school board level, is taking place in places where there ain't a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of suburbs, outer ring suburbs, rural, and they need to know this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so those statewide organizations, so part of getting informed too is, okay, what organizations are working to make sure that we teach this history accurately, that teachers have what they want, that we're not pushing, that they're not being
organizations
pushed
like Honesty for Ohio Education,
exactly
which is
what
a
I was
really important website.
Absolutely.
They're doing great work.
Maybe we could put the link in the chat, because they've really been at the forefront in this most recent iteration of pushing back against those who are trying to limit what's being taught. And they're going into places, where those school districts, those rural and suburban school districts, where a lot of this stuff is being pulled out of the classroom. And so
then the more you know, the better questions you can ask.
Yeah.
And it's really important to confront. We have school board elections coming up in November, and it's really important for people to confront the candidates, to ask the right questions, to find out where the extremists are. And I'm talking about the negative extremists, the ones that believe in the banned books and are against equity and are against social justice. You've got to have the information in order to ask the right questions. So what else can people do?
Absolutely. And on a school board issue, I mean, that's one of those areas, right? We're shining light, raising publicity, making sure that people understand so who's running for what their positions are. Because what we've actually seen is, those who are pushing this stuff, it's actually not a lot of them, right? They're just
it's a small group, but they have a lot of money and big voices.
Big voices and a lot of money and a lot of outside money, right? And so the response is that, we actually have the majority on our side. We have right on our side, right? We just have to marshal, and we have to organize that. So that means, following those state school board meetings, following those local school district meetings, being a part of it. That means supporting your teachers, right?
Thank you.
Because that's community, right? The teachers are vulnerable right now. And they're
leaving the profession
in droves,
really quickly because
of droves.
Yes, a lot of this pressure is causing them to just say, forget it.
No, absolutely. Veteran teachers are leaving, and younger ones, are like, well, this is not what I signed up for. I'm not even going into it. And we're seeing that. And so what can we do? Those who have kids who are in school districts, right? In schools now, connecting with those teachers who are teaching these subjects, right? Letting them know that you have their back, letting them know that you want this history to be taught, and tell them to spread the word, right? Like this is so critically important. That support going forward is going to be so critically important. And also, I think it's also critically important to recognize that part of what's at stake now is public education.
Yes,
because
it is.
This is a concerted effort to destroy public education. And this is how they're going to do it, right? I mean, and the defunding is coming. I mean, it was part of the whole charter school thing.
With universal vouchers, the defunding is here. Yes.
So this is all together. And so this is very much also about, our children, right? And the broader education, the kind of quality education that they will get. And so we have to strengthen our commitment to public education publicly.
And I think that's a beautiful statement for us to end on. Dr. Jeffries, thank you. We're going to take some Q&A. Now, do we have questions in the chat? Let me check and see. There was a question, what is the status of banned books and anti-CRT efforts in Ohio? I know some states have passed laws. I think we do not have any laws on the books yet, but is there any legislation pending? as far as banning books or anti-CRT efforts?
So most of, and certainly, Sister Johnson, you could probably speak to this more so than anything else, but most of the book bans, if you will, aren't at the state level, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
Florida's a little bit unique in terms of what they've identified. I mean, Florida's just acting crazy right now, but a lot of it is coming at the local level. Even in Florida, what they've done is they've empowered individuals, and I was going to say parents, because a lot of the people who are bringing these complaints don't even have kids in the public schools, right? I mean, they're just activists. And in Tennessee, for example, it's like one person, right, who's filing all of these, these questionable complaints about books that this person hasn't even read. And so what then happens, and this is where that sort of in the environment, the chilling effect can take place, where if you go into a library and say, I'm worried about, I don't like this book, then the pressure that's being put on librarians, and I was meeting with Ohio, the sort of organization of Ohio librarians, and they're like, we feel it with people
Mhm.
coming in questioning, why do we have a display during Pride Month about LGBTQ folk, right? And then that there's no law that says you can't, but when you have a couple people who are coming in and targeting these folk and the books that are in there, then most people are like, it's not worth the fight. And so then they wind up pulling the books, right? And so part of it is just that sort of social pressure and political pressure that is being brought to bear on schools, on school librarians, on school resource people, that then lead them, and school principals and administrators who are like, look, we don't want the heat. And so if that means we're going to pull this, we're going to pull this, but we got to turn up the heat. We got to turn up our own heat and be like, no, no,
Yes.
no. You don't touch that book, right? You leave that in there. In fact, you need to order some more.
I agree. I agree. Someone asked, do we have a petition in Ohio to stop the ban from happening? I don't think we really have a statewide ban happening in Ohio.
Yeah, no statewide ban. Again, I mean, this is almost, it's
Yeah.
sort of rolling, sort of district by district. So we just
Mhm.
got to pay attention to sort of where these things are happening. Honesty for Education in Ohio does a good job of sort of pinpointing sort of where sort of these flare-ups are occurring. And
Mhm.
so connecting with them would be important.
Now, I know we have a presentation coming up in a minute, and I think she's a librarian, so we're going to really hear more about that because I want to read this statement, and this might be a question for our next speaker. It said, when I was in high school, books were banned and removed from the libraries and reading lists. It causes a trickle-down effect because even if you want to find the books, you don't know what to look for. How should I, as a parent, get a book list for my adult children of banned books that live in Florida and Illinois?
Well,
So,
there's a number of, I mean, here in Ohio, we talked about honesty in
mhm.
education, but also the Zen Education Project,
Yes,
um,
yes.
which does a lot of work with teachers in areas that are facing bans and that are being targeted. And so if you go to their website, Zen Education,
Yeah, Zinn,
um,
Zinn, Howard Zinn. Yeah.
Howard Zinn, right, and they
Hmm.
draw their inspiration from him. So they've been doing a lot of organizing around supporting teachers and educators in those that find themselves in those circumstances.
Now, also Teaching Top Tolerance, and they changed their name, and I can't remember what the new
It's
name
Learning for
is.
Justice. Learning for
Learning for
Justice.
Justice. They have a wonderful website. They have information about the book banning and so forth. Great, great website.
Yep.
Learning for Justice. Yes, indeed. So I want to. I don't see any more questions in the chat for you, Dr. Jeffries. Here's a statement: Black history is a valuable part of history. We must continue to fight for it to stay alive. And I agree. And there's some really important links in the chat. So Dr. Jeffries, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for
Absolutely.
your time. I appreciate it.
For sure.
You have really given us a wealth of important information this evening. And I do thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And most importantly, thank you very much for all of you, for Sisters Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, for the wonderful work that you continue to do and the emphasis that you place on this important subject.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
All right. Thanks. You take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.
Davina?
So I'm back to you, Meredith or Aaliyah. Um,
Um, let me pull Davina off mute.
okay. And put me on.
Okay. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what an amazing and enlightening conversation that we just had. So I want to say thank you to Merle and thank you to Professor Jeffries. I am Davina Hogan, the other co-chair of the Social Action Committee, and I have the honor of introducing our final moderator for the evening. One of the partners in this endeavor is Principal Monique Patterson Caesar. Monique Patterson Caesar currently serves as the principal of Superior School for the Performing Arts with East Cleveland City Schools, where she has served since its opening in the fall of 2022. With more than 27 years of experience as an educator, she has had the pleasure of serving as a middle school English language arts teacher, building level administrator in elementary, middle, and high school, and as a district level curriculum specialist. Monique Patterson Caesar earned a Bachelor of Science from Ohio University in Journalism and Public Relations, a Master's of Arts in Education from Kent State University, an Educational Administrative Certification from Ursuline College. She is also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and serves as the chairperson of the Arts and Letters Committee with the Greater Cleveland Alumni Chapter. Please, let's welcome Monique Patterson Caesar.
Monique, you're not
Talking to myself. Okay.
There you go.
I am sure that all of us would agree about the importance of the ability to choose the books that we read. The fundamental skill of learning to read and being able to choose those books to do so shape us as individuals and broadens our lens into the world. Some of the conversation that was had in the last presentation is just a segue or foundation for the continuation of this conversation regarding banned books and how it affects us across our cities, states, and countries. Did you know that in states like Missouri, they have pushed several bills to try to axe library funding? Those bills are being pushed by people that are running for governors, and they want to use eminent domain, so to speak, with something called administrative rule. With the new administrative rules, they can take anywhere from 1% to 20% of library funding away from a library, and they would have new rules. The rules would include the libraries must have strict new policies barring them from giving minors books and that their parents don't want them to read. Also, that libraries may keep any age inappropriate books away from areas meant for young readers. And they would clearly have to publicize how they selected those books and how parents can challenge those choices. It would even affect something simple as story time and what could be read to students during story time at a library. I personally would say that controlling funding to control the narrative is indeed banning books. But let's get more insight from our guest tonight, Tiffany Fontenot, who is currently the director of the Peabody Library at Vanderbilt University. She's an experienced educator and researcher. Her subject specialties include education, K-12 curriculum, children's literature, government documents, maps, social sciences, and business. She is experienced in classroom instruction, designing curriculum, educational technology, and educating language learners. Additionally, she is knowledgeable in the areas information literacy instruction from grades kindergarten through doctoral level students in diverse learning environments. Dr. Fontenot will provide us with insight into the evolution of what we call diversity, the issue of banned books, and advocacy. And very importantly, she is a member of our illustrious sisterhood, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Dr. Fontenot? She needs to be unmuted and you can start her presentation.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I am I was a member of Theta Eta Spring 95, and I was also a member of Greater Cleveland Only chapter for a while. So I'm so happy to be here to talk to you about this serious issue that I go through every day as a librarian, to help make sure that our children have access to books that are affirming to their identity and helps them grow, not only for our, children within Black children, but children at large to understand life, right? So I'm here today to talk to you about some of these issues and how some of this came to be. You got Dr. Jeffries' version of how things kind of occurred. I want to talk to you about how it occurred in library and kind of education land, so we can understand how these issues are affecting you locally. Look at it at children's literature. What happens, I'll extend Dr. Jeffrey's story further. Kylie was sitting in his class and learned some things, right? And she became a teacher, and she also became a librarian. And she also understood the importance of bringing these books into the classroom, because the demographics of these classrooms are changing. The demographics of librarianship and education are primarily white and white women. So people were understanding that we need to bring these books into the classroom that more reflected the children that are in these classrooms to have better engagement, right? So I want to show you some pictures so you can actually see what's been happening in the last 5 years, because it's been pretty dynamic. The number of diverse books written by diverse authors has increased fourfold between 2014 and 2022. According to the data from the Children's Cooperative Book Center from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, you can look here. In 2012, 93% of the books were centered in whiteness. If you look at for the BIPOC folks, 3% for African Americans, 1% for Native Americans, there were more books about animals than there were about children of color. Okay, proceed forward. Thank you. So if we look, there's something that we learned was that if you only have a single story, you're missing out on critical thinking and learning, right? And there's no truer themes behind this than Chimamanda Adichie and her single story. If you have not seen it, look it up on TED Talks. It's amazing. And also Chinua Achebe, which says, there's a great proverb that until the lion has its own historians, the history of the hunt will always be glorified by the hunter. So as we know, these books have been centered in whiteness, but this is how things have changed. Okay, please go ahead forward. So if you look between 2018 and 2015, there starts to be a shift. There's less and less books that center whiteness and more books that center children of color, but we still have more books about animals than we do about children of color. Next slide, please. So if we go to 2020 and 2021, we can look and see what the results are and how the publishing industry has changed to be more representative of books. And when I tell you that these books are truth-telling books, I have learned more as a children's librarian reading children's book than I have reading adult books. They are amazing biographies and historical instances that are really telling what's happening with our histories and at an early age. And this leads children to go into classrooms questioning, why did this happen? Why did they let this happen? What can we do to change this? And these are some of the things that have been causing issues. When Nicole Hannah-Jones wrote the 1619 Project and her children's book, Born on the Water, you can see the truth-telling in these books and how it raises questions and how it's difficult for teachers to understand how to position these books in classrooms, but yet these books are necessary to affirm our children. Okay. Next slide, please. So I want to show you some examples of the books that are being banned, especially the books by Black authors. So next slide. All American Boys by Jason Reynolds, Stamped. Ruby Bridges' book that just came out, This Is Your Time, which is a book that talks about finding your voice. New Kid by Jerry Craft, which is about a Black kid in the suburbs trying to navigate school. Brown Girl Dreaming, Hood Feminism, and All Boys Aren't Blue, which is an LGBTQ story. All these books are always on the top 10 list, for especially for Black books. The Bluest Eye as well. These are some of the Black books that are getting banned, and it's important that we understand the content of these and why they're saying these are critical race theory. It's really not. It's showing the deficit perspective that of whiteness within these scenarios, right? It's in Ibram Kendi's book, Stamped, it actually explains racism and power dynamics. That's why this book is getting banned. So it's important for us to have reading books and clubs around these topics so we can understand the strength of these books and the strength of this in terms of literacy and engagement within our community, because these books will strengthen young folks' stance in school, which will make them more engaged as readers and make them more engaged in the classroom. And these are the things that are currently missing and why it's scaring folks so much. So recently from the American Library Association, these are some of the statistics that have come out. When we look at the titles that are targeted for censorship, within a year's span, we've had almost 4,000 titles that have been targeted for censorship in different places. And when we look at it, it's public libraries and school districts that are getting hit the hardest. And if we look at the titles that are mostly being challenged in states, Ohio's one of them. I'm living in Tennessee, and that's another one where we can see books getting challenged. And in Tennessee, laws are actually on the books for the banning of critical race theory, if you will.
So, Fonso, a question for you. If you look at the states that are listed there that have more than 100 titles challenged, why would you say it's occurring in those specific states and not others across the country?
I think the idea too of the conservative constituents and the way that the conservative advocacy groups have been networking, it's really a blueprint that's just getting replicated and is finding a stronghold within these states. For example, in Tennessee, Nashville is very liberal, but outside of that, it's just a sea of conservatism, and it's very easy to pass these type of laws there, right? It's a lot, because outside of Nashville and Memphis, it really is conservative. They run the state legislature, they are running school and library boards. It's very easy for them to challenge books and to create these laws. It's literally the laws that are happening in Florida are just kind of moving up north, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And do you see that also? We're talking about banned books that are literature or non-fictional books, but let's talk a little bit about textbooks and the power that states like Texas and Florida have, and why they have that power and what textbooks move forward.
Yes, and again, it comes back to their right-wing advocacy. They've made a blueprint to suppress what they consider to be critical race theory, which is not. And I keep telling people too that in schools, what these teachers have done have really looked at books that mirror populations. So it's culturally responsive teaching, which is just finding materials that are engaging based on identity or popular culture, right? But they're looking at these textbooks, and they are, and the textbooks have been more truth-telling as well, and they're not depending on textbooks at all, and they're depending on things like Learning for Justice and Zen and all these materials that have been coming out, and they're trying to suppress those materials as well as textbooks within classrooms. I know teachers who are in Texas, and they are checking lesson plans and like creating school libraries as detention centers to be able to suppress learning is basically what it comes down to, and suppressing us understanding our identity is really what it comes down to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide.
So when we're talking about advocacy, there are things that we can do, because they'll always come up with it's hurting our children and things like that. But what we have to understand is that reading is a foundational skill for learning, and it's a part of our democratic freedoms. One of the things that librarians do is that whether we like the book or not is not an option. our responsibility is to put books on the shelves that show a diversity of thought, and it's people's ability to go in there to learn and make decisions for themselves. And that's one of the talking points that's very important about book bans. Everybody's tax dollars goes into schools and public libraries. Everybody's dollars have a say, not a particular segment of society. Parents have the right to guide their children to what they want to read, but parents can run what's in their household, not what's in other folks' household. And that's what I think is an important thing to know, because this small group, which I used to live in Beechwood, for example, and there was a conservative group in Beechwood that was even trying to suppress, you know, like slavery within schools. And I'm like, how can you have the Holocaust and talk about never forget, but we're trying to ban slavery from being taught, right? So it's like we have the right to have our representation within library spaces. What's been happening too, on top of what Dr. Jeffries was talking about, it's called silent censoring. Librarians are so scared now because of these laws and things like that. They're not even putting books on the shelves. They're scared to do it because they're scared for their jobs. I was just in Arkansas a couple of weeks ago talking about book banning at Central High School, where the governor who went to Central High School is banning AP African American history. And they oh, I forgot I'm so sorry, I forgot my point, but like if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere, right? We have to understand our history, and we have to advocate at every level of government, and there's different ways to do it, to be able to counter this small fraction of conservative people that have a blueprint and have been just running their game like from state to state, right? I'm sorry, I forgot my thought. It'll
That's
come
okay.
back.
Well, Sora Fontenot, there are a number of us that are on the call or on the presentation that are parents. You talked about a small group of parents leading the charge to change things. What advice can you give to us on the screen today that are parents to take back our power so that there's diversity in libraries, diversity in schools, and diversity across the board for literature?
Yeah, so especially in terms of Black history and things like that, teachers have classroom libraries, there's school libraries, there are public libraries. Ask what their policies are of censoring books and how they put books on the shelves, right? That's so important. You've got to go to not only just your school boards, but your library boards to understand this. What is their stance when books get challenged, right? How do they make it known? And then what is their process to do so that you understand how that works? There was a question about how to find books, like quality books on Black history. And they named some good spaces, but there's also a Black caucus of the American Library Association. We have Black librarians who select books as well, so that you can know what's available and use those lists to compare against what you see in public libraries and what you see at school libraries, to be sure that those books are on the shelves. Because like I said, folks are getting scared and self-censoring. So it's important to know what the books are so you can check for them in your classroom libraries, your school libraries, and your public libraries to make sure that these books are being made available.
Thank you. Next slide.
Okay, so what can you do, right? And I think that of the things, but I'm going to go through some other too, because this is very important. First of all, it's understanding the challenges, to actually look at these books and understand the points of why they're being challenged, because these mothers of liberty, they're not even reading half of these books. I guarantee you they're not, right? So it's important to be able to read them and understand them so that you can support what those books stand for within literacy. You should also take to social media and talk about these issues in blog posts and create videos about books that meant something to you. If The Bluest Eye meant something to you like it did to me when I was reading it, because it helped me understand why, you know, when I was going through high school, I was treated the way I was. Write about the significance of that book so they understand why it's important for other people to have that same experience. Put it in a blog, put it in your Twitter post, and share the messaging of that. Create a banned book book clubs, right? To talk about these books so that you can actually have the conversation to understand why, you know, books about the intersection of Black and LGBT is important to have for those students who are struggling with their identity, to be able to be affirmed where they might not be able to be. Attend community meetings and board meetings. Hold community literacy clubs that have Black books. I think this is central because just on the aspect of literacy alone, we can't depend on our schools to teach us our history. We need to go back to the Carter G. Woodsons and the ideas of Dr. Goldie Muhammad in Cultivating Genius, where we create community groups that talk about Black history. Write letters to your local school board, your state legislators, and your Black organizations to collaborate together. We can't do this in isolation, which I think is a part of the problem, because the Mothers of Liberty and other groups, their coalition building is so strong, and we're all working in isolation. We need to be working in groups, like bring everybody together. We need the Panhandle, we need the churches, we need all the groups to come together to say that we're not standing for this in our area. That's going to make a difference. Support your local libraries, because they're going to start defunding libraries, and that's going to take away from the jobs that libraries provide with resume searches and helping create resumes and using computers and things like that. Once they start defunding libraries, it's not just the books that are going to be missing, it's access to the internet that our communities need in order to survive, to get their paychecks taken care of when they don't have computers and internet in the home. So every time that you hear something good that happens in a library, whether it be something a librarian did, a program or whatever, talk about it, put it out there so that people hear the positive things that libraries do, instead of slamming us with the negative stereotypes of us providing inappropriate literature.
So if I can stop you there, you made me think about something when you talked about finances and defunding of libraries. Is there any profitability attached to Black erasure or cultural erasure in this issue? Because a lot of times when there is a bigger issue, it boils down to finance and money, getting something or losing something as a result. So do you think this whole issue of banning books has any financial implications?
I think that financially, you mean like if they defund libraries?
Defund libraries, or certain books are not in circulation anymore?
The thing is though, that because of the rise in diverse books, it's only been serving publishers and serving textbook places that have been meeting this need. So if you look at what they've been doing, is that they will end up and the reason why publishers have been so scared, and with the exception of Penguin, most have been scared to say something, is because they don't want what happened with Bud Light and things like that to happen with them, where these conservative groups are targeting specific companies and things like, and publishers, like they've been targeting libraries and teachers and things like that. So if I can tell you that financially, it's maybe not financially, but it's the pressure of being put on Front Street about providing these materials, right? I think that's where a lot of the pressure is going to be, and why we've seen so much silence, because we've seen how the right rallies behind causes and people will just fall behind it immediately. So I think publishers are scared, like textbook companies are scared to start pushing out the material in the same quantity that they have been because of this, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. What else was I gonna say? We have to engage with young people too and get their voices out here. It's so important that we hear how important these books are to young children. If you hear the stories, there's a story called it's a story about a girl with a blue hijab, and I actually have a Black males that go read to children at Vanderbilt, and he took this book into the classroom, and there was a girl with a blue hijab on there who was smiling from ear to ear. Not only was she happy, but he walked away and he said, I understand how important these books are, right? As a read aloud. So we have to get their voices involved to because I think their voices are what's going to change the story, to get them involved in the advocacy and them talking to the people who are shutting them down. Because once we hear children's voices, we start to kind of wake up as to what's really important, right? That's how they got the African American history AP changed in Arkansas. It was a teen-led movement. So we have to start doing things like that.
So, Arfana, are there any other? Well, there you go.
Buy Black books, support Black publishers, and like I said, forefront these books as much as you can. Talk about them as much as you can. We have enough issue trying to sustain literacy in our community after COVID for them to also take away identity building books that would attach our children to engage in education, right? So this is all parts of a puzzle. And you can see them steadily taking away these pieces. Each one means something. I can't express to you how important it is that you make sure that people in our community have a library card, that they are going to these services and that they are supporting libraries. Because right now, I'm telling you, when I was in Arkansas, 2 library directors were getting fired and they were not Black. They're just, folks are just getting fired left and right. It's very real and it's moving up, and it will be heading to Ohio sooner than later, right? Where Tennessee has introduced legislation to defund federal education, federal dollars for education. That's coming your way.
Absolutely.
You know, we really have to stand up for our libraries and our schools and start pressuring our politicians to speak out on this. I can't say that enough. And we have to coalition build differently. The American Library Association has the Unite Against Book Bans campaign. Please sign up. Please coalition build within Cleveland to work as a group on this issue, because they're dividing. They've got us because we're not as unified as they are. We really have to collectively work together, especially as we come around to these political this political season that's coming up. We really have to organize better than what we are. I think we're playing catch up to them, and they're like 5 steps ahead of us. And we are just now getting in the game of this. And we really have to reverse the narrative that we are seeing out here from the conservatives.
Absolutely. And where you say buy Black books, I would challenge each of us. When we go out, we buy presents for our friends and our children, to add a book by a Black author to that gift list.
Yes.
That starts a conversation very young with children, and they begin to embrace and appreciate diversity in books. Even give it to your friends, your loved ones across the board to have those conversations. To have community book clubs. We gather all the time. That's what we do for fellowship. Why not have a book discussion where there be something very broad or specific to, again, encourage that diversity and challenge others to do so. So thank you for that.
Yes, and work with organizations to do read alouds. Go in and read these Black books to classrooms. I know, like, most Black organizations have some push in where they go into schools and read books and things like that. Find ways to do it with Black books within the Black community to do so as well. It is sorely needed. It is sorely needed.
And I see on the screen you also have actions that we can take. Do you want to talk about these 2 links that are there?
Yes, so this is the Unite Against Book Ban from the American Library Association. And what it has a toolkit that lists everything that we've talked about today, so that you can take this and start advocating at a grassroots level, right? So that's what this is. It also keeps you informed of programming and things like that. I saw someone mention next week is the American Library Association's Banned Book Week. If you Google it, you will find that Ibram Kendi is speaking. Please attend these sessions. LeVar Burton is going to be out here pushing the issue. Attend these sessions to learn more about these books and ways to create programming and moments within your community to keep shouting this out loud. Please put it on your social media and all that regarding this issue, because we have to get our community involved. I'm involved in policy and legislation and advocacy. I'm the only one in the room. It wasn't until I said in librarianship, why have we not involved Black Caucus? Why have we not involved grassroots folks in the community, that they even considered doing that, because it's out of their focus to understand that. So if we don't have people in the room, we have to have people on the ground and people pressuring our legislators to act on this.
Absolutely.
Yes. Did anybody have questions about where to find lists of Black books? Because I can share that with you as well. If you look up Black Consciousness book list, the Black Caucus of the American Library Association put that together. And if I could Google it real quick and find it for you, I'll drop it in. But it's the BCALA Black Consciousness book list. And it not only tells you how to think about finding Black books, it also lists it. The Black Caucus of the American Library Association also creates book lists every year. Like, they resort to Zen and things like that, and that's great. But Black librarians are out here doing this work for you, and we need that support. And all we do is read this material, right? So we have these lists available for y'all to make it easier to understand what the books are, so that you can take them to your school board and say, why aren't these, like in our libraries, why aren't these, like on the bookshelves in the classroom and things like that? Or just to have and buy, so that, like, we can see our identity within these books. I'm telling you, these books are so good. I've never seen, it would have changed my whole mindset if I was a kid and I'd had these books.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm going into the chat to look for comments and or questions. The first comment there is from Lisa Bowie. She says, thank you for sharing your insight on children's books that affect people of color. We must teach our children at home too. Let's buy the books to read and pass them on. The second one also is from Lisa. She has a question. She says, what role do private colleges and universities have in supporting banned books? And what recommendations do you have for these institutions?
So I work for a private institution. I'm leveraging my latitude of liberal arts and things like that to help the people who can't. So I'm the voice for the public librarians and the school librarians who cannot speak, because we have more latitude to do these things at private schools. We're not held to public funds. So that's where a lot of the voices should be coming to help leverage those who cannot, right? So that's what I can tell you, that the benefit of being in a private space is versus a public space. I'm seeing the difference. Like, I'm advocating for school librarians because school librarians are afraid for their jobs right now. So I have to be that voice because I know I can do so more than they can.
Are there any additional questions that aren't in the chat that you would like to add? I also see some resources are there.
Yes, I put in the Black Consciousness book list so that y'all can see the Black Caucus website and find other materials. They also have Black graphic novels and things of that nature too. So it's more than just one thing, because it's important to find different ways for our children to read. However they want to read, let them read, please. I can't express that enough too. We have tons of great Black graphic novels and other books that they can get to as well. Because the censoring of books is the first thing. I'm telling you, next, it's going to be broadband internet and stuff after this. So that's why coalition building is so important. This is easy pickings, picking on some librarians and teachers. They're also going for net neutrality, access to internet and things like that. It's a part of a bigger issue. And I can see it because I'm in libraries where the free access is available. It's just the beginning. That's why I really need us to figure out how to coalition build differently within our communities, because they got us because we're separated.
Absolutely.
We really need to get together more on this.
And to your point, exposing children early to books that have people that look like them, that have people that have experiences like them, first of all, gives them a sense of pride.
Yes.
It opens them up to believe they can do anything, be anything, feel anything, and it's okay.
Yes.
So as an educator, I would say, please, 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 when you buy that baby shower gift, put a book in the bag. When you buy a gift for a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 50-year-old, please add a book to that gift. It just opens up a world of knowledge, experience, and again, it validates who we are.
And it talks about our history starting in Africa. All these books, it's changing the mindset that we did not have, that they did not, that our teachers did not know to teach us, right? These books, histories are starting in Africa and talking about the greatness and identifying kings and queens and military folks and artists and things like that. That's why it's so important, because it's showing the diversity of our greatness. You know what I mean? And I've seen kids challenge teachers after they've learned this stuff. Why haven't you brought in this person who also did this? What about Bayard Rustin? Why is he not included in this? Different things, like, because these children's books are now available on Bayard Rustin, on these folks that we never had before. Carol Boston Weatherford, our own soror, is writing some incredible books. She wrote Unspeakable Truth about the Tulsa riots, right? She's and this is how we know that it's arbitrary, the books they're picking, because there's no way that her books, the truth telling that she's telling, should not be, they should be on, they would be scared of these books, because, but this shows you that they're not reading them. Her whole catalog is truth telling. She's written over like 30 books. She's our soror. Please pump her up. She just wrote a book about a spelling bee that happened in Akron just recently. It just came out. I can't remember the title, but it's Carol Boston Weatherford. She's our soror. Check her out. She's an amazing children's author, right? We need to be uplifting her in her books too, because I'm telling you, they teach lessons and expose the truth as well.
Absolutely. Can you put her name in the chat for people that want to reference it later?
And if you look, Carol, yes, Boston Weatherford. And if you want to, if you don't have access, you can YouTube Read Aloud in Carol Boston Weatherford, and you can see people reading the book so that you can see what they're about. So you can get if ever you find a list or a book title, just go into YouTube and be like, read aloud for that title, so you can actually see the book if you don't immediately have access, so you can see what it's about. But that's our soror, right? And she's a part of this that's creating identity building within our community. And she's doing, I can't tell you, an amazing job. Once you read these books, look at Unspeakable Truth. That's what started some of this, right? That's what started some of this. So yeah, and if my name is tiffany.fontenot@vanderbilt.edu. If you need help in directing you to find book lists and things like that, I'm a children's librarian. This is what I do. I can put together a list and either send it out or just ask me, because like it's so important that y'all see what these books are like today that we didn't have.
Can you also drop that into the chat in case people want to reference?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our discussion, and thank you so much, Soror Fontenot, for that inspirational a message about books, about BAM books, about the importance of us being seen and heard, and our power and what to do next to move forward with advocating for the books that we write based on our experiences.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for having me. I got so much love for y'all in my hometown. I can't tell you. It makes me proud to be here with y'all today. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Monique, can you share the other comments that came through?
Okay, let's see. Sora Crystal Carr, Jeter wrote, yes, this discussion has been so important. I also serve on the Coretta Scott King Book Awards Roundtable, which honors distinguished children's books about African Americans on an annual basis. Parents and educators would benefit from reading titles from these lists. Our group just awarded Soror Weatherford's book this year. See if there's anything else. Margaret Bernstein wrote, I just looked her up and I realized I have 2 of her books on my shelf. Thank you for all this great information. There are also links there to Carol Boston Weatherford. Somebody noted that they just had to take off, but they're very pleased that they took this valuable time to hear a wealth of information that she intends to share. Thank you, thank you, thank you. There's also an evaluation within the chat. Please complete that for us. We love you, Tiffany. Tiffany says, love you back. And I believe that is all of the comments.
Thank you so much again for having me. I appreciate it.
We thank you. Someone also wrote, thank you, outstanding.
Okay, there was Lisa, I can't unmute you, but she wanted to say something. I was trying to wait to see if she said she had a coalition building example. Was hoping that she would put that in there, but it didn't come. Well, Lisa, maybe you can send us an email and we'll be sure to
Okay,
share
I'm
it.
unmuted now. Can you hear me? I'm
Who's
unmuted.
Who's unmuted?
This is Lisa. The host unmuted me.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to share a quick example of a coalition building that happened to me yesterday that I think would be a great idea for those that may be able to do it. I received a call, like you get calls during voting time asking, are you registered to vote and things like that. But this call was about climate. And they asked me a question, basically yes or no. And then my answer was yes. And they said, well, would you mind if we transferred you to the senator's office and to let the senator know that you appreciate his continued support for the budgeting of this particular climate issue. And they literally transferred me to the senator's line, and I was able to leave the statement. And I bring that as an example just to say a lot of times, we have it on our to-do list to do things, but just the fact that that person had called me, transferred me over to the line, and I was just able to very quickly leave a message to the senator's office. I just thought it was a wonderful example of the type of things that are happening to get people organized and mobilized. So thank you for the floor.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. Do we have anything else? We still have a little time. Folks are just responding. Thank you so much. I'm getting emails and text messages with the same thing. Great job. So informative. Thank you. Outstanding. Loved everything about this. Samaya. Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate all the resources you shared with us. I'm always adding books and novels to my classroom and personal library based on your recommendations. So I'm sure this love fest can probably go on all night. And I'm so sorry that we really wanted to hear from both of our amazing scholars tonight. I'm gonna continue to work with Monique and with Merle. I can see us having a series out of this. But Sora, Tiffany, thank you so much for giving up your time this evening. We miss you. When you coming home? Okay, you don't have to answer, but we would love to see you in person. And so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. I wanted to thank Madam President and members of the Executive Board and Executive Committee for your support tonight. We have the best technology and publicity team, so thank you for all that you did to help us bring this program to fruition. We could do nothing without you. Thank you to our moderators, Sorrel Merle Johnson and Monique Patterson Caesar. I want to thank soldiers, Professor Jeffries and Director Fontenot, for their courage and deliberate leadership on the front lines of this battle in our classrooms, right? Few housekeeping notes. Again, we did mention that we are celebrating our MIDS, or our Midwest Regional Day of Service, this Friday. I'm not sure of the time. Is Yvette Clark on? My co-chair for the Midwest Day of Service. But it's not really a public event, but I'm just giving it to you for your knowledge and information. We will be installing a little free library at the Delta Center. We're really excited about that. And on Saturday, September 30th, as you heard earlier from President Frazier, we will have our Regional Day of Service. We have partnered with the City of Cleveland and their Department of Recreation. We'll be in 5 different locations: Collinwood, Cadell, Lonnie Burton, what am I missing? Frederick Douglass, and Zelma Watson George. And so we're going to be giving out free books. We're going to be doing some read alouds with the children. We've invited some of our literary partners, Literacy Cooperative, and the Dolly Parton Library Imagination, Literacy in the Hood, Seeds of Literacy, which they will be coming to talk about free GED opportunities and ways to access their programming. And we're going to have some food. So it's going to be a day of service. The city of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County specifically, our children are not reading at grade level. And a lot of adults aren't either. I remember visiting the Seeds of Literacy program a couple of months back, and I was listening to a gentleman read, and he was doing sight words, y'all. And he's a deacon at his church. So roll with me for a second. He's a deacon in his church, which means he is quoting scripture and Bible verses, probably like rhymes. Like he has memorized the Bible but can't write. We are some amazing people. The mechanic who can't read instructions but can fix your car, right? We still have a lot of work to do. So that is why we are so excited about embarking on this initiative. These events are free and open to the public. We will also do voter registration as well on Saturday. So that's what we have going on Saturday. And so finally, I want to remind everybody that we are in the midst of an election. Many of these crazy oppressive policies that exist are because of the people that we allow to get elected. But not me. Y'all know I love y'all and I care about y'all, and I'm really trying to be the best public servant that I can be. But we have an election coming up. November 7th is election day. Early voting starts October 10th. We will host an issues forum, a virtual forum like this on October 18th. I'm not sure what day that is. I think that's a Thursday, probably around 6:30 or so. There are 3 issues on the ballot: reproductive freedom, marijuana, and Tri-C levy is up. So we will be discussing those pro and con. So join us if you can. You can look for that information. It'll be forthcoming. And then we're planning an in-person candidate forum on October 12th. The location is not locked in at this point. So check back on our website, dstcleveland.org, or check our Eventbrite or our social media pages for more information. And so with that, just want to remind everybody to stay woke. And good night. Aaliyah, give me my theme music. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was Coach Prime for a second. All right, y'all.
Well, I was not ready.
Good night.
Night.